One of my favorite quotes is, you have your whole life to make your first album and only 18 months to make your second.
Yep.
It's kind of akin in some ways, Kevin, to like a company taking on funding who has like a really great first product. And it's like, okay, now we need you to go multi-product. And then you're like on that search for like, what's the next thing?
Yeah, a record company is very much like a venture capital firm, where it's like, one, you're spreading bets amongst a bunch of sort of unknown entities through there, and you're looking for one or two of them to really, pay off, and knowing the other ones likely aren't.
And so if I have it correct, just tracing your background, that helped land you at Reverb, which was actually acquired by Etsy.
I mentioned when I was hired, they weren't hiring. It wasn't a role that I applied for. I just got to know the CEO, and currently as a consultant, put on my consultant hat and was like, well, if you want to grow the business, here's what you should do.
Do this and that,
this, And he was like, okay, you're hired, do it.
Come do it.
And then it became this very like terrifying experience of like, well, it's one thing to parachute in as a consultant and tell people what they should do and then leave. It's another thing to then actually have to go do it.
Right. Is this thing on?
Yesterday's price is not today's price.
Welcome back to the Run the Numbers podcast. Today's guest is Kevin Drost, CFO of New Era ADR, and possibly the only finance leader who's gone from scouting talent at underground New York bars for Sony to reimagining how legal services get priced. Before spreadsheets, Kevin was in a band playing house shows, including one for the Hells Angels. That unexpected path took him through the music industry to Reverb, the music gear marketplace later acquired by Etsy, where he cut his teeth on marketplace economics and the art of forecasting a business that refuses to be predictable. Today, as CFO of New Era ADR, Kevin's shaking up a very different kind of legacy industry, dispute resolution. He walks us through how the company is reinventing a notoriously opaque, expensive process, ditching hourly billing in favor of flat fees, and building a model that makes legal faster, cheaper, and far more aligned with business needs. We also dive into Kevin's Cowboy forecasting. I love this. Why he favors simplicity over simulation, what it takes to make fast, informed estimates on the back of an envelope, and how real financial confidence comes from hands-on understanding of the product and the customer. He also shares how he helps teams at every level of the company understand what actually drives the business and why finance should be less about gatekeeping and more about finding ways to say yes. All this and much, much more after a short word from our sponsors. So if you listen to this podcast, you'll know that I am incredibly passionate about the FP&A space because that's the route I went to get to CFO. And I want to tell you about a tool that has exploded over the past few years. It's called Aleph. And I remember getting outbounded by them about 2.5 years ago, and I actually took the bait because they claimed to be able to do a demo with my live data, with me right there on the call. And so I had to see it to believe it. And it was the founder running demos back then. Shout out Albert, hope you're listening. And he connected my NetSuite and built my P&L using their Excel add-in in like 15 minutes. And I was really impressed. Since then, Aleph has gone on to raise money from some of the top VCs out there, and they've built an impressive roster of customers. Many of their customers have been on the podcast, like the CFO at Turo, 8 Sleep, and Zapier. They're all really big champions and supporters of Aleph like me. But it's not just an Excel add-in. Aleph also allows finance teams to work with their live cross-system data using Google Sheets and their web app. And that's cool because it gives teams the option to support a wide range of needs and workflows like budgeting, forecasting, and variance analysis. And speaking of variance analysis, they're doing some really cool things with AI-powered variance analysis. It basically allows you to figure out what's going on and why, and it takes the time that you'd usually spend from hours to minutes. It's really cool. So I highly recommend checking them out and taking them up on that demo or trial, just like I did back in the day. And you can learn more and get started at getaleph.com/run. That is getaleph.com, aleph.com/run. Tell them CJ sent you. All right, I got to get up on my soapbox for a sec here. Everybody's talking about AI-powered this and automated that. But here's the thing about revenue recognition. It's not just about moving data around. It's about getting it right, full stop. So RightRev is laser focused on one thing, RevRec that auditors actually trust. See, there's a difference between automating revenue processes and automating revenue recognition correctly. RightRev was actually built by the godfather of RevRec, who understands ASC 606 compliance, audit controls, data validation, and the flexibility needed for complex B2B contracts. We're not trying to be your billing system or your ERP. We're the revenue recognition engine that sits between your contracts and your financials, making sure every dollar is recognized correctly, on time, every time. Companies like Snowflake and Logic Monitor don't just need fast revenue reporting, they need revenue reporting that's audit ready from day one. And that's honestly where RightRev shines. And what I love about RightRev is they're not out there trying to be everything to everyone and just slap some, AI slop on top of it. While everyone is building these massive platforms that do everything in a kind of mediocre fashion, RightRev does one thing exceptionally well. They make sure your revenue recognition is bulletproof. Ready to stop gambling with your RevRec? Visit RightRev.com to see how we make complex revenue simple. That's RightRev.com, where revenue recognition actually works. Most finance leaders still see travel as a cost center, something to manage, reduce, or delay until the numbers look better. But the Navan Business Travel Index, validated by NASDAQ, empowered by millions of corporate transactions captured through Navan's platform on how organizations are meeting and investing in face-to-face connections to fuel growth, tells a different story. Companies that are growing are moving. Business travel activity is up double digits year over year. International hotel spend is rising faster than domestic. Rideshare use is surging as teams compress more high-value meetings into fewer days. This isn't about perks. It's about pipeline, deal velocity, and customer retention. The CFOs winning right now aren't slashing travel, they're optimizing it. They know exactly where every dollar is going and the ROI it's delivering. The Navan BTI helps you see how your program stacks up against the market each quarter and where you might be leaving revenue on the table. Get the data. Spot the gaps. Turn your travel spend into a competitive edge. Download the latest Navan Business Travel Index today at navan.com/BTI. That's navan.com/BTI. And lead with the numbers that actually drive growth. Kevin, welcome to the show. How are you, man?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm in a cottage on Nantucket. If you see me sweating profusely, it's because the AC doesn't work, not because I'm overwhelmed talking about business models today.
Sounds good.
I feel like I've got a true renaissance man on the pod because we're going to talk legal tech and your role as CFO of New Era ADR. But before we get into like flat fees and forecasting, I want to rewind because you started not in finance, but in music. So you were a talent scout for Sony. And if I've got this right, you were also in a pretty badass band that played house shows for Hell's Angels.
Yeah. So I've got a relatively kind of non-traditional background for a CFO or somebody in finance. I started out as a musician. I went to college on a jazz guitar scholarship.
Okay.
And so while doing that, was playing in a bunch of different bands in Denver where I went to school. One of which was this like rockabilly honky tonk band called the Honky Tonk Hangovers, who for whatever reason were super involved in like the biker scene in Denver. And they ended up playing all these shows they weren't quite Hell's Angels yet. If you want to start a chapter of the Hell's Angels, you don't just sign up for it. You become like a prospect for a certain amount of time. And in that time period, your job is to basically like, one of them is to throw a big party every couple months and invite all the other kind of rival biker clubs to the area and like prove that like your Hell's Angels material. And so they would throw this giant party out in the middle of nowhere, Colorado, invite like 300 big burly bikers, and this band would play for it. And it was actually awesome because I played a bunch of like sketchy gigs as a guitar player, and this one actually, because it was like you had all these rival groups, like the intensity was a little high, and because of like everybody was on their best behavior, because they knew if something like went wrong, like the whole place would explode. And so like people were actually really kind. They were super supportive of the band. Like everybody there was a character and stuff. So it was an awesome gig.
It was like mutually assured destruction.
So totally.
So what type of scene were you in back then? Like what were some of the bands that you really liked in college?
So like I studied jazz, and so got deep into that world, but also, like any other kid, into like rock and indie rock. And then also a lot of like country and bluegrass is like a big kind of melting pot of everything, because I've got a bunch of different tastes. And I also play a few different instruments. And so I would play like pedal steel guitar in country bands, which is like, it's a weird instrument, but you'll hear it in a lot of like country stuff, or I play piano in some jazz groups or things like that.
Yeah. And now all the bluegrass music is getting intertwined with the country music these days and kind of having to come up.
Yeah, I think it's super cool when you have real kind of rural traditional types of music, whether that's bluegrass or jazz or Irish folk music or whatever, and it starts to blend and get into like a jam band or get into like a death metal band or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think it's just cool when you get that kind of cross mixing.
And being a talent scout at Sony, does that mean you get to go to a lot of shows and you're kind of like listening to be like, okay, this could be the next big thing?
Yeah, that's your job. So basically, like after just playing music, I was hired as a talent scout for Sony, first in London and then mostly in New York. And yeah, your job is to go out to clubs every single night, night after night after night, and listen to some amazing groups and a lot of terrible groups. And so you're finding new talent, but then also you're kind of like once you sign that band, you're also like the liaison between the company and the band themselves. So particularly when they're making records or so you end up, it's called A&R and artist and repertoire. And so you're sort of working with a lot of brand new artists, but also a lot of like established artists. So like I ended up helping make records with like, for whatever reason, this is the mid 2000s, and it was like a bunch of 80s bands doing like big comeback records. So I worked on like records by like Cyndi Lauper, who was like a dream to work with, like Duran Duran, like just a bunch of really, phenomenal legendary bands, but all sort of in this like comeback stage.
That's epic. I always wondered what A&R stood for because I hear musicians and rappers reference it all the time. And I'm like, I don't think it's accounts receivable.
No. It's artist and repertoire. And it stems back from when like the record label would tell the artist exactly what to do. I'm going to pick a singer. I'm going to pick a song, the repertoire. I'm going to put those two things together. You're going to record it and I'm going to go put it on the radio. That's what A&R kind of stems from. Today, it's more like the like I said, the liaison between the artists and the record company itself. So separate from like the marketing division or the finance division or distribution or those things.
We often talk about the relationship between like CFOs and investors and that dance. Are there any ties or similarities to how like that dance is between the A&R rep looking for the talent and kind of funding them and standing them up and the talent being like, oh, if you're real hot shit, I guess you get to choose between quote unquote the investors or record labels.
100%. It's almost the same thing. And so I'll continue telling my story as we go through this. But after Sony, I actually started a record company.
Wow.
And was not just the kind of A&R element of it, but also the the business end, working with investors and everything else. And like, yeah, a record company is very much like a venture capital firm, where it's like, you're spreading bets amongst a bunch of sort of unknown entities through there, and you're looking for one or two of them to really, pay off, and knowing the other ones likely aren't. And it's very much the notion of like a hot act, just like a hot startup, whatnot. It's going to have lots of competition amongst itself. They start to get this almost like frothy environment behind it, and they're the ones that are able to extract the best terms, get the best price, all those other elements. It's very similar between like a VC world and particularly A&R, but the record company world as well.
And is the distribution similar? Like in VC world, like 1 out of 12 investments returns the portfolio, something like that?
Even less, yes, but even less. Probably 1 out of 100 on the record label side. That's shifted a little bit. Like this, call it like the traditional record industry model, where it's like, all right, you sign a bunch of bands, you hope one of them becomes massive. There are less massive bands today. There's there's less totally unknown bands. It's kind of like whether it's YouTube or Spotify or social media, like it's kind of democratized things a little bit. And so you end up with less of like the kind of home run, massive, multi-platinum selling, Guns N' Roses of the world, and a lot more like kind of mid-level, artists who make tremendous music, make a tremendous living for themselves doing that, but like less of the like Taylor Swifts and more of the name a kind of typical mid-level band or so.
Just to pull on this analogy a bit more, like you take on money from PE or VC, like things they can give you. They can give you cash. They can give you introductions to potential people to hire. They can help you find customers. They can give you like some technical advice, I guess. What's the value prop of like a record label, or what are you saying as an A&R rep to get them to sign?
A record label and an A&R rep is like probably more akin to like an incubator versus like a pure VC funder, right?
Okay.
Like if you look at like a Y Combinator or something, that's probably more similar to a record company, where it's not just capital and it's not just expertise and advice, but sometimes it's infrastructure as well. And that's what a record company is. Like you have the infrastructure.
For like distribution, you mean? Like to hit the stores after?
Whether it's hitting the stores, whether that's like promotion and getting the song on the radio, social media, like all the other elements that go into like marketing and breaking an act, a record company is traditionally doing most of those things. There's some things like maybe touring or licensing that maybe the band does themselves or not, but typically like the record label is actually an operating entity that's really doing a lot of the work, and the artist is being an artist and creating great music through that. In the VC world and the startup community, the startup itself is the operating entity. The VC provides capital, they provide expertise, maybe connections and networking. And then maybe, like I said, sometimes they have some infrastructure as well of like maybe they have an operating partner, or they have an engineering staff or things that might actually get in and help. But traditionally, there's a little bit more separation between like the investor and a startup than the record company and like the artist.
That's super fascinating. One of my favorite quotes is, you have your whole life to make your first album and only 18 months to make your second.
Yep.
It's kind of akin in some ways, Kevin, to like a company taking on funding who has like a really great first product. And it's like, okay, now we need you to go multi-product. And then you're like on that search for like, what's the next thing?
Yeah. And you also, I've had the privilege of working for like a couple of serial entrepreneurs who have had multiple successful exits. And there is, just like in an artist, you have extremely talented artists who are able to crank out great record after great record. You have other ones who like spent their whole lives creating one thing and that was successful, and then either lost motivation or just didn't have the same opportunities, and you don't see them again. And it's really inspiring to work with like a entrepreneur who like clearly has done this before, knows what they're doing, and brings a certain level of both experience, but also just like, I don't know, natural inherent charisma and capability to get things done. And that's why they're successful like over and over again.
Hey, thanks for listening. We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors. Morgan Stanley recently said NetSuite is under the threat of disruption. That's right, NetSuite, you never get fired for buying its software. So what's the threat? The answer, Rillet. Rillet is the AI native ERP modern finance teams are switching to because it's faster, simpler, and 100% built for how teams operate today. It doesn't take 12 months to implement, it doesn't feel like filing taxes to use, and your accounting team will actually love it. PostScript closes the books in only 3 days. Windsurf, bet you heard of them, they run finance with just 2 people. And Rillet is backed by Sequoia Capital. Yes, that's Sequoia. Unicorns like PostScript and Windsurf and hundreds of other companies have made the switch, and they're closing books in record time. If I were running a finance team today, I wouldn't default to legacy. I'd look at what's coming next, and Rillet is here. You don't want to be that guy at cocktail parties complaining about how bad his ERP is. Wait, am I the only guy who talks about ERPs around a keg? See how fast your team can move. Book a demo at rillet.com/metrics. That's RILLET.com/metrics. RILLET.com/metrics. As a CFO, you're expected to bring clarity to everything, including how your company manages ownership. The tools you use should make that easier, not harder. But when they come with hidden fees, data you can't always trust, and support you can't rely on, you end up with more frustration than clarity. That's where Pulley comes in. Pulley is the cap table management platform built for finance leaders who need accurate, decision-ready data from a system that works for your business, not against it. With Pulley, you get intuitive workflows, audit-ready reporting, and support you can count on, all backed by predictable pricing you can plan around, so you can stay compliant and make smarter decisions about your company's future. Manage everything from fundraise modeling to ASC 718 reporting to custom liquidity programs, all on one trusted platform. Hundreds of high-growth companies like Linear, Fathom, and Runway trust Pulley to help turn ownership into a strategic advantage, and joining them is now easier than ever. You can switch to Pulley in as little as 5 days, and for a limited time, they're offering 25% off your first year. To claim your exclusive offer, visit pulley.com/mostlymetrics. That is pulley.com/mostlymetrics. Pulley.com/mostlymetrics. Well, if you've listened to this podcast before, you definitely know that I think it's cool to be a fan of business. I'm obsessed with researching how the best companies operate and specifically how they manage their money. And I've learned that a company's financial stack can make the difference between world domination and obscurity. That's why I want to tell you about Brex, because I want you to rule the world. Brex is an impressive financial services and software company that has grown immensely since it was founded in 2017. In just the last year alone, Brex accelerated customer acquisition by 50%, with 91% growth in enterprise customers. And there's good reason that over 30,000 companies from startups to enterprises have flocked to Brex. Brex offers the world's smartest corporate card on a full-stack global platform that is everything CFOs need to manage their finances on an elite level. Plus, they offer modern banking and treasury, as well as intuitive expenses and accounting automation, bill pay, and travel. Wow, it's all on the roster whenever you need it. Brex grows with you. CFOs tell me all the time that Brex makes it easy to control spend before it happens, automate annoying tasks, and optimize their finances. Because listen, at the end of the day, Brex helps them make every dollar count. So if you're a fan of smart businesses too, check out Brex at brex.com/metrics. That's brex.com/metrics. There's something to be said about being able to, like Marvin Hagler, the boxer, used to say, like it's hard to get out of bed and run those miles in the snow when you're going to sleep in silk pajamas. It's like if you've had some level of success, whether it's like as a founder or as an artist, like to get out of bed and make that next album or make that next product.
Yeah, and I think it just depends on what motivates you. Like some people are motivated obviously by financial success, but it's just like I want to go build something. I want to go disrupt something. I want to go do it over and over again versus like, I want to retire, and both are totally legitimate paths and, legitimate, inspirations or whatnot. And just different people are motivated by different things.
And so if I have it correct, just tracing your background, that helped land you at Reverb, which was actually acquired by Etsy.
Mm-hmm.
Walk me through that and then maybe give us some highlights from that sales process.
Yeah. So in between Reverb, which I'll explain, and running a record company, I started doing, a lot of consulting for other media and entertainment companies. We were talking about ESPN earlier, and that morphed into, and usually like strategy consulting, product development, international expansion. That morphed into doing consulting for a lot of tech companies, just because there's a lot of overlap between media and tech. And so after doing the kind of traditional consulting route for several years, like I started to get a little burnt on just as a consultant, it's super intellectually rigorous. It's, you get to engage in these great projects with great teams, but you're not building anything, you're building a PowerPoint deck, and that PowerPoint
you're
deck,
kind of a tourist.
Exactly. Yeah. You get to jump in and you get to really understand a business very quickly. You get to work with smart people. But again, you don't own anything. I don't even mean physically own it. I just mean you don't have a sense of ownership.
Yeah.
And that's, for me, it just started to get a little burnt on it. And so I wanted to go back to building a company. And so I started looking around the kind of tech scene. And I was in Chicago at the time. And this guy, David Kalt, he was one of these serial entrepreneurs, had several prior successful exits, had just started this company called Reverb, which is kind of like a eBay for musicians. It's a two-sided marketplace, but it only focuses just on buying and selling music instruments, and very much takes the ethos of an Etsy, where it's very community focused and it's very centered on who are you buying from, what's the story behind this, this thing that you're buying from them, and really tries to humanize the experience of buying something online, which can feel very mechanical and transactional. So he had just started the company. I think they'd done a seed series, pre-series A. And for me personally, I got right away what they were trying to do. Just being a musician and knowing that space and knowing how special the experience of buying an instrument for a musician is, and how buying that same thing on Amazon or even eBay, and those are great companies, but it just sort of shreds that sort of sense of I'm going to go walk into this cool vintage guitar store and I'm going to hang out and I'm going to pull this dusty guitar off the wall and it's going to change my life. That's the experience musicians want. And it's very hard to replicate that online. And he was trying to the extent it's possible. And I love the idea. I love the team that he was starting to build. And so got introduced by a mutual connection and joined in 2015 or so as the company was starting to scale, and took on a bunch of different roles. I built our international business. I helped run our sales team. I oversaw analytics, did a lot of corporate development, investor relations, board relations, like all those elements and different hats you wear in kind of an early stage growth company. And then one of which is as this kind of role of corporate development, and eventually I took on the role of like chief strategy officer, was helping oversee this acquisition by Etsy in 2019. So we went through a process. We weren't really intending to we didn't run a formal sales process. We didn't hire bankers. We had a strong relationship with Etsy just as a similar kind of vertically focused marketplace. And they were one of the first to do it really, really well. And so generally, honestly, we were just copying them in most of what we were trying to do from a product development standpoint or payment processing or things like that. So we just had a good relationship to begin with. And as we were kicking off a process to actually do a fundraise round, we were going to raise a Series C. We started talking about maybe a strategic investment, and that just very quickly led to full out acquisition conversations.
It's crazy. Like, we're going to talk about the business model there, but it's crazy how you found a way to stack your skill sets and your interests going into that business.
It was a little bit of luck, but also it was intentional. It's what am I good at, and what do I like, and what motivates me? And I understand business now that I've run a business, now that I've been a consultant for large business. I have an MBA, that I've put into practice. I like music. I understand the mindset of a musician and what's important to them. I like finding something that's broken and trying to fix it, and very much that experience of buying an instrument online, it felt like was a broken process that could be improved. And so all of those kind of stars aligned, and it turned out to be, the perfect role for me at that time. It happened to be headquartered in Chicago, which is where I'm from and was living. And so it was a little bit of luck and a fair amount of saying, all right, this is something I want to go do and I want to be involved in. I mentioned when I was hired, they weren't hiring. There wasn't a role that I applied for. I just got to know the CEO, and currently as a consultant, put on my consultant hat and was like, well, if you want to grow the business, here's what you should do.
You do this and that,
and this, and he was like, okay, you're hired, do it.
Come do it.
And then it became this very terrifying experience of well, it's one thing to, parachute in as a consultant and tell people what they should do and then leave. It's another thing to then actually have to go do it.
Right.
So he made me kind of put my money where my mouth was, and basically created, the role for myself, and was lucky enough to have a really kind of impactful role in growing and building a business.
Speaking of putting your money where your mouth is, I'm like a junkie when it comes to marketplace business models. I was a CFO at a marketplace for aftermarket car parts. How difficult was it to forecast that type of business? Like, was it somewhat predictable, or was it I don't know, all over the place?
Like anything else in forecasting, it comes back to how much data do you have? And in the early stages, it was absolutely impossible to forecast. Yeah, when I first came in, I had my MBA, my consulting background, and I was like, I'm going to put together the most rigorous, accurate forecasting model ever. And I spent 2 weeks building out all this functionality through there and taking in, to consideration our cohort performance and the decay rates over time and our CAC and the LTV and average purchase, all these different elements. I sat down with the CEO and was kind of walking him through it. And he's like, oh yeah, this is fabulous. Now, what happens if we put more money into Germany? Or so. It's I don't know. I didn't build that into the model. And he's like, well, do it. And it's well, I can't edit this thing in real time. I need to go back and take another week and build that in as a variable or so. And he got super frustrated and was like, this is a waste of time. You're wasting your time. I don't want to see this big, beautiful model. I want something that I can play with in real time and get a sense for what's going to be the impact of the business. And this is I firmly believe in the early stages of a business, whether that's a marketplace or any business, a forecast is a goal setting tool. It's not an accurate prediction of what the business is going to do. And so if it's not a useful kind of goal setting tool and saying, all right, this is what we want to go do. And then what is the impact of that in terms of how many people will we have to hire? What does our cash position need to look like? That should be the intention of a forecast and a model early on. And so he sort of ripped me a new one and made me build this very simple kind of, he called it cowboy forecasting. He's like, you have 2 minutes to build a forecast because I want to say, I want to grow by 200% next year. What does that mean for my business? How many people do I have to hire? How many transactions is that going to be? If I feel relatively confident of my transaction volume and the average purchase value, that's going to be my revenue. Now work it down to what my, cash flow looks like. And that turned out to be way more valuable of a use of time and of a tool than like a 3 financial statement integrated model that, our VC fund loved or so. Like that looks great, but is relatively useless because it's going to be inaccurate and it's not very easy to work with. Having a single 1-page set of, the key elements of your P&L and your balance sheet all integrated and be able to like work with in real time, way more valuable. And then you can spend those 3 weeks you would have spent building it, like acquiring a customer or building product features or doing shit that actually like builds the business.
I also think if you're able to build something simple, it demonstrates that you're able to take something complex and get it down to something that's impactful. Like, I don't think you truly understand. Like, if you are able to use 18 to 20 tabs, it gives you a lot of surface area to spread out like stuff you don't understand. If you can get it down to 1 page, it's like you own it.
Totally. And it also makes you prioritize like what's actually impactful for the business. Like going back to a marketplace business, really the growth drivers are going to be, your marketing spend and your return on that marketing spend and the number of customers and your customer acquisition cost from that and your product development costs. You don't have inventory, you don't have warehouse, and you don't have a lot of other cost structures or things that drive customer acquisition and retention. It's going to be your marketing spend and the engineers that you're hiring and the return on that product performance. And so focusing on those 2 things gives you a lot of like, it simplifies things, but it also allows you to focus on the things that are actually impactful for the business.
Kevin, I love how you also said that you copied stuff that Etsy was doing because like we would do the same thing. There's a lot from a marketplace business model. Like, don't reinvent the wheel. Just copy what companies who are doing it great are doing.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, our first approach would generally be like, we have some new function. It could be, payment processing. It could be shipping. It could be, the way we, some of our search functionality. Usually our first, approach would be like, well, what does Etsy do? Okay, well, that worked for us. Perfect. We don't need to reinvent it. Let's just copy what they did. A lot of times it wouldn't, because while they're the same business model, the experience of buying, a handmade set of earrings is a little different than trying to find a 1972 vintage Stratocaster or something. And so sometimes it wouldn't work, but generally we'd say like, is there somebody else that does this well? Awesome. Let's just do that. And then it's only when you really have to go build it yourself or invent it yourself that you do.
I want to talk more about Cowboy forecasting here because in a world obsessed with now AI-driven scenario analysis, I think it's actually more important than ever to be able to take all this data, especially like if you're a marketplace that's doing like thousands of transactions a day, and just like get it down to what actually matters so you can talk about it. Like, do you think that simplicity is even more important than it used to be?
Yeah, well, like you said, you have to understand the model. And a lot of times people build these black boxes, and that gets even worse when you have, some AI coming through and spitting out numbers that you really don't understand where they're coming from there. And so if you don't really understand the drivers of that model and the sensitivity of that model, not only is it not going to be helpful, it's going to be a trap, that you're going to set for yourself. And so if you are able to use, like going back to the Reverb side, like we started with this dead simple model. Over time, like you do outgrow that. The reason we had this dead simple model is so you could use it, but also the reality that it's going to be wrong.
Yes. Every model is wrong. It's just how wrong.
You're making guesses. And the earlier you are as a company, the more, that those are just pure guesses. And that's why I said it's more of like a goal setting tool than it's an accurate like cash flow projection tool or so. As you grow as a company, you have more data through that. Like we got to a stage at Reverb, and then once it was acquired by Etsy, Etsy's a publicly traded company. So, and by this time I was the CFO at Reverb. You have to, develop a set of projections that are dead accurate and able to be given to the street. And so, in which case, the level of rigor and analysis going into that is very different than Series A kind of scrappy startup trying to just, really focus on building the business. So by that time, we were using pretty sophisticated, analytics to determine every customer, their behavior, their acquisition costs spread across the various channels in our marketing mix, being able to project out like what's our kind of not just the kind of return on marketing investment, knowing what is it going to cost us to acquire a customer and the kind of next incremental transaction, but the marginal return on that. Because the more dollars you spend in marketing, the less, the worse the return gets. And at a certain point, it gets, less than one. And the trick is spending every single dollar humanly possible up until you're at that 1-to-1 or slightly higher kind of return ratio, and then stopping. Because if you're spending less than that, you're leaving money on the table and growth, and you're hindering growth. If you're spending more than that, you're burning cash from that. And so to get to that stage requires a huge data set and enough kind of analytical rigor and power to be able to really have some accuracy in that. But if we tried doing that at, year one of Reverb, it would be a completely wasted effort, because you manufacture all this kind of false rigor into things. And you say, well, because I have all these data points and because everything else, I feel really confident about, my forecast. But all those inputs in that they're either made up or statistically just not significant. And so it's a trap.
I've done that before. I built a model that would do everything but cook you breakfast in the morning. And it's like, but if you toggle the take rate by 2%, the entire thing blows off.
Yeah, no, totally. Increase your payment processing rate by 2 basis points and it changes everything. And it's like, okay, good to know that that's a really sensitive input into this model. But if I have, if I'm trying to say what I'm going to do a year from now in any level of confidence, like the confidence level is 0% through there. So don't waste time on it. Waste time on like negotiating a better rate on your payment processing or your merchant processing rate, or improving, your conversion rate on your marketing spend.
Can you talk to me about the art and science of making estimated guesses?
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm a big fan of like the 80-20 kind of, principle, particularly like I said, like the earlier you are in a company, the less benefit you're going to have by having that extra 20% or so. So it's like, well, what gets me close enough, and what assumptions and estimates can I make in the spirit of like back of the envelope type of math that says, how big is the opportunity? What gives me that sense of generally, yeah, it's this or this? Because it's essentially like, again, whether it's forecasting, it's anything else, it's about decision making. And the more you can quantify, the elements that go in your decision, the more kind of unbiased your decision making process can be. But that's a tricky thing to get into, because there's bias that's introduced to those decisions. You have emotions that go into it. There's something you want to be true, and so you make it true. And so the more that you can convert like something that feels qualitative into something that's quantitative, the better decision you can make from that, or at least the better way you can get input from other people, because you've removed the kind of personal motivations and incentives behind things. You say, well, here's what the data says. Do you agree with my interpretation of what that data says? And so when it comes to like educated guesses and estimates, it's saying, you asked how hard it is to forecast in like the marketplace industry, and in the music instrument side of a marketplace, we're dealing primarily with like used instruments. Every single investor wants to know, how big is the used instrument marketplace? Like how big, what's the TAM to that? Nobody has any idea. There is
nobody knows.
No data in the world that will tell you how many used guitars were sold at garage sales in the world in the last year. But you still have to have some sense of like, all right, is this, a $10 billion industry or $100 billion industry? And so you'd have to just look for like, all right, what are some analogs that we can utilize? What are some things that we do have some sense in? Like, so on the used instrument side, like I said, there is no market analysis report that's going to tell you how many used instruments were sold, and therefore what's Reverb's share of those, those sales to there. But there was somewhat decent data for brand new instrument sales. It wasn't highly accurate, but it was enough to be able to say, okay, well, here's what the brand new instrument market, called $10 billion or so. We know that used instruments are going to be some portion of that, like on top of that. And we'd start to say like, all right, well, if you're a guitar store, and we had great relationships with almost every guitar store in at least in America, we'd say, go to them and say, well, how many brand new instruments do you sell and how many used instruments do you sell? And if it ends up being a ratio, well, 1-to-1 or something, and that store does $1 million in brand new sales, and we have that data, we can say, well, they do $1 million in used sales. Then you can consolidate all of those and say, okay, that's the used market. It's more complicated, but there's more elements to it than that. But like my approach is like, all right, what do we have some insight on? What can we extrapolate into what we're trying to understand? And then at a certain point, when does it makes sense to say this is good enough. This is 80% of the way there. It's not 100% accurate, and it's not 0% accurate. And what's the incremental benefit of going from 80% to 85%? It's usually almost nothing. So forget it. Like, go with that and move on from it. Because again, it should be used to help make decisions, but really should be used to help acquire a customer, create a better customer experience, retain a customer, the things that are actually like impactful for the business.
What I loved hearing that, Kevin, is like you're making calls so you can basically stand on top of the assumptions you made to see further, because it's kind of like, dude, we just need like a starting point here. And then you actually went out and talked to customers, which I think is really impactful, or suppliers, to figure out like if they had any heuristics or rules of thumb that you could plug into the model. So it's like you're continually honing it, because you start out with like this huge surface area to go, and you just keep kind of narrowing down into where you need to be in order to say this model is good enough to at least, make some assumptions on.
Coming out of grad school and getting an MBA, like I went into consulting, and there's a pretty typical kind of consulting interview technique called a case study, where it's very much like, it could be a business situation, it could be something totally absurd, like how many ping pongs fit in a swimming pool kind of thing. And like the reason these consulting firms who are trying to recruit kind of like creative strategic thinkers is not because like nobody cares how many ping pong balls fit in a swimming pool. It's like, well, how can you take this kind of abstract unknown thing and break it down into some chunks and use some assumptions that are that you can validate through there, and say, okay, if this applies, this likely applies, and therefore this likely applies, and kind of walk through a kind of logical steps to say, okay, this is how many ping pong balls I think fit in a swimming pool, because I know how many are in a 1x1 piece, because I know a ping pong ball is 1 inch generally. Okay, so let me work through those things and come up with an answer that's probably not right, but the logic to get there is probably sound. And it's probably good enough to have an estimate of how many ping pong balls are in there, because that situation, not the ping pong ball one, but just like you have some unknown thing that you need to go figure out. And there is no off the shelf report to tell you what the answer is. There is a lot of times nobody's done it in the past, particularly in like early stage companies, like you have to figure it out. And so given that level of uncertainty, what can you feel confident about? How can you build from that? Then how can you go validate those things by talking to some customers or talking to other people, and just trying to get to the point that you feel good enough from it that you can move on to the next thing, and not get in this like very typical like analysis paralysis state that I think a lot of like finance people get into, because they've been trained to be highly analytical and be highly accurate. And at a certain point, that becomes a hindrance more so than like a tool.
It's a blessing and a curse. And I'm guessing that the confidence to be able to make these types of higher level fast forecasts, it has to come from like knowing your customer and your product to an extent. How have you built that first hand intimate knowledge of the customer base and product over your career?
Regardless of your role in a company and what the company does, like you have to use the product as if you were a customer of it. So Reverb's an easy example, because most of the people that work there were musicians, or at least motivated by music. But a lot of them either weren't, or even if you're a musician, that doesn't mean you buy and sell a guitar every day like people on Reverb do, because like guitar is expensive. You might buy one, in your lifetime, or one every couple of years. But like we wanted to really militantly kind of ensure like everybody working at the company really could put themselves in the shoes of somebody using the product. So we actually created this whole process. Every quarter, all of the new hires into the company, we would give every one of them $1,000 and say, go buy and sell as many things as you can on Reverb over the next 3 months. And it'd become a contest. And whoever at the end of the day had the most money left over and had bought and sold the most number of things wins. I think maybe we gave them $1,000 or something, whatever. Like it was just a way to ensure people were actually using the platform and the product itself, and could really empathize with the customer themselves and really understand the mindset of somebody who is going to go buy a guitar online. Like that's intimidating. Like it's expensive. You have to figure out how to ship it. You have to, feel like you trust the platform that you're going to go give $3,000 to. Like if you haven't done that, it's going to be really hard for you to be able to pretend that you understand the mindset of a customer. And that's not just for like a marketer or somebody in product management or so. Like I think it's just as critical for the accounts receivable person or the lawyer or anything else to have that same sense of customer understanding, because it's going to help you make those decisions regardless of what it is, whether it's your AR policy or it's your, the legal, terms and conditions or anything else. Like, you have to know what your customers want. And the only way you can do that is by being a customer.
We had that same experience at my last company. Like, we came up with this really beautiful way to basically, like, if you were a mechanic out in the field that was repairing stuff in somebody's driveway, you could order ahead and go pick up the part. And like, I remember our chief product officer was like, okay, I got to try this now. And so like, he tried to do it and he showed up and they're like, we never even got the order. And so then he's like having this discussion with like the person at the front desk and stuff. And he's describing it to us and we're like, oh my goodness, there are like so many different variables in this. And like, to your point, like even just packing up a guitar and sending it out, like that's a whole another component of like basically order to cash process that you have to be aware of.
Yeah, exactly. And you can hear somebody talk about it, but if you haven't experienced it, you're not going to understand it. And therefore you're not going to be able to identify like, hey, this is super painful. Like, we are making this harder for people. Or again, pick the role. Let's say you're in marketing and you want to describe, the value of the platform or so. Like, how are you going to describe it if you haven't actually done it? And you haven't had that sense of like, hey, this is super easy. This is super satisfactory. Or this is a thing that keeps me up at night. And now we've solved it and I know how to articulate it. Similar thing if you're, doing FP&A or so, and you're kind of trying to project off the business, and those inputs are going to be things that result in your customer acquisition and your customer retention and your transaction volume. If you haven't used the platform, you don't really understand how would somebody first learn about the business? How would they come onto the platform? What would keep them coming back? Your model is not going to be nearly as good as if you really kind of have an intimate understanding.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because you've said that you make it a priority to help everybody at the company, especially entry-level employees and new joiners, understand key financial terms and what actually drives the business. How do you approach that in practice, and why do you think it's so important?
Yeah, well, I think it's so important in that, like, what's that saying? Like, accounting's the language of business or so. Like, if you want to go move to France or something, you want to start a life in France and you want to have success in France, like, you better learn how to speak French. You don't have to. You can probably figure out some way to fake it or copy other people or so. But if you don't speak the language, you're never going to really be super impactful in that community. And it's the same thing in business. Like, if you want to be super impactful and you want to eventually be the CEO or pick a role through that, and you don't know how to speak the language of the business, like, you're always going to be at a disadvantage. And so I think it's really important that people have a basic understanding of like the metrics and the KPIs and the terms. And they're not all financial metrics. You have a lot of customer metrics and operational metrics, but I feel like you need to understand those. And as a business and a company, as like a leader of a company, you have a responsibility to ensure that every person at the company also understands those. And a lot of times that can be really intimidating for like an entry-level hire. And companies just have all this kind of vernacular and acronyms and terms. And a lot of times they'll talk about it like everybody understands it. And somebody straight out of college will, they're all excited and they're motivated to come to this company. And it's gibberish. They have no idea what people are saying. So one practical thing is just like every quarter, I'll go through a very simple, like, here's how the business did last quarter. And before doing that, just do a little bit of like term definition. Okay, we're going to talk about gross revenue. What does gross revenue mean? We're going to talk about gross margins. What does gross margin mean? As if I'm talking to, a fourth grader or so, and not to be, condescending at all. It's saying, hey, some of this for everybody listening to this, let's say it's a big, company presentation or so. Some people, this is just a recap. Other people, this might be fresh. So I'm going to assume nobody knows what we're talking about. So everybody can feel comfortable and kind of getting up to speed with it. We're going to go through these terms, and then we're going to show you how we did on each one of those. Let's talk about revenue growth. Let's talk about, cash flow or so. And, sometimes you're limited in what you could share or show, like in a publicly traded, company or so. But in general, I lean towards be as transparent as humanly possible. And particularly in an early stage company, because every one of those employees has taken a huge risk on joining that company. They're generally taking a lower salary. It's being compensated in equity. They have a really vested interest in the success of that company, more so than if you go take a job at like, Citibank or something. You still could be super, motivated by the success in Citibank, but like you're not taking the same risk profile as if you go join a 10-person startup company. And so you have a right to understand how's that business doing. And again, as a leader, you have a responsibility to let people know how it's doing and be transparent about it and communicate it in a way that they can understand it. They don't have to walk away from that, assuming they have, an MBA or something, but they have a right to be able to know like how is the business doing and know what that actually means.
That's brilliant. I've always started out interviews and also onboarding sessions with, hey, would it be helpful if I explain how our company makes money? Which, like, regardless of what you say, I'm going to tell you how the company makes money, because I think it permeates through everything. How you market the product, how you build the product. Like, it's pretty important to know, like, oh, we don't get paid till like 180 days after the sale or something like that. Like that impacts everybody.
Yeah, and not only, but why does that matter, right? If I'm not getting paid for 180 days, like how does that impact the expenses that I have today? And what are those expenses in terms of like salaries and everything else? Like not everybody intuitively, if you don't come from that background, will understand like why does that matter or so. But if you can then convert it into like your paycheck, and let's assume you're doing work today and you have a mortgage payment today and you have food that you're buying today, but we're not going to give you your paycheck for 6 months from now. What does that mean for you? And helping people kind of contextualize it like that, I've found to be really helpful in sort of translating things from, business speak in a presentation to like, oh, okay, I get it. I get what that means.
We had a salesperson one time. There's a marketplace model, so we make a very small percentage on every transaction. I think he said like, hey, I think I should be getting paid more because I'm helping to like facilitate X millions in transactions. And I was like, oh no, you think we're getting all of that, don't you? And then I was like, it's actually incumbent on me to explain that so everybody like clearly knows. But it was just like one of those like, okay, this is where the miss is.
Yep. Yeah, 100%. We would go through the same thing at Reverb. Like, oh, we did $1 billion in sales. It's, well, we did $1 billion in gross merchandise value. Our revenue is going to be much lower than that.
So something that I know both of us are passionate about is getting creative with pricing models. Can you give us the quick overview of what ADR does and how you've switched up the way that the business monetizes compared to like how the industry usually tilts?
Yeah, absolutely. I get, because we're now coming to like my real job, what I do now.
Yeah.
So currently I'm the CFO of New Era ADR, and New Era is a legal tech company that facilitates arbitration and mediation, which they call alternative dispute resolution, or this term ADR from that. And how I went from musician to consultant to helping run Reverb and e-commerce marketplace to now helping run this virtual ADR forum is one of my partners at New Era was our general counsel at Reverb. So he was our lawyer, and he came to me and said, hey, I've got this idea for this business, because in the United States is one of the most litigious countries in the world. It is a nightmare for everybody in trying to resolve the kind of inevitable disputes that come up in business. Whether that's an employment dispute, whether that's with a contractor or a customer, it just happens all the time. And we have this process, rightly so, in the United States called arbitration, which is sort of like private court. And it's set up to be a faster, easier alternative to go into like the federal court system or the state court system, because those are set up for civil disputes primarily, not always commercial disputes. And arbitration is meant to help facilitate that in a faster, fairer, more like accessible way. The reality is it does not. It is generally just as time consuming and frustrating and as expensive as going to court. And I had experienced that in my role as an executive at Reverb and other firms. Colin Willings is his name, is one of the founders of New Era, had that same problem. He had a group of other general counsels and lawyers who are helping run startup businesses who had all had the same problem, which is like something's inevitably going to come up. And it is so expensive and time consuming and frustrating to try to deal with that I'm just going to settle and make it go away at any cost possible. Even if I did absolutely nothing wrong, the way our system is set up is it is so frustrating and so expensive that I'm going to do anything I possibly can. I'm going to pay to make it go away. And the reality is it really doesn't need to be like that. So all New Era does, and where this is going with is he came to me, was describing it, I was like, yeah, I get it. And that sounds amazing. My whole family are also lawyers. So like I'm not a lawyer, but I've been involved in this world quite a bit. And I told him, hey, I'm still happy with my role at Etsy and Reverb, but when and if I'm ever ready to leave, I'll come help you build this thing. So he left and started New Era in early 2021 or so. I joined in 2023 But what New Era is doing to kind of disrupt that environment is typically the reason arbitration, litigation, any kind of dispute resolution is so painful is generally you have two parties that want to just get things resolved and get on with their lives. But you have attorneys on both sides who are trying to represent their clients to the best of their ability. And by doing so, they are doing everything humanly possible to make it frustrating for the other side. They're trying to delay things. They're trying to file endless motions to compel various things. And they're just creating all of this rigor. The whole process is run like it's the 1960s at best, where you have lawyers flying all over the country. You have physical documents being FedExed back and forth. You have big in-person meetings at big, expensive conference rooms. Like it hasn't really evolved at all. And by all of those things combined, you also have absolutely no idea what something's going to cost because everything's run on like an hourly billing model. And so it's like, hey, I have this dispute with a vendor through there. There's $20,000 at dispute. We can't come to terms on it. I don't want to like hammer them and put them out of business, nor do they want to do that to me. But like, we're not able to come to terms on something. Generally, both of those sides just want to get on with their lives and do so in a fast, efficient process. And it doesn't work that way. And generally what they say is like, I have this $20,000 at dispute, but it could cost me $50,000 to go get a resolution. It cost me $500,000. I have no idea. So I'm just going to pay the $20,000. I'm going to walk away or whatever. So what we've done is written a set of like very streamlined rules and procedures to oversee a dispute. That says, okay, this side does this thing. This side does this thing. Goes in front of a judge makes a decision. Everybody moves on with their lives. And that cuts that whole process down from an average time frame of like 1 to 2 years to under 90 days. 2 is we've built a completely custom virtual platform to facilitate the entire process. So rather than lawyers flying back and forth across the country or documents being FedExed, everything's just done digitally, like everything else in 2025 or so. Again, that cuts out an unbelievable amount of like inefficiencies in the process. And then by doing that and making a much more efficient process, we're able to operate completely on flat fees. So rather than saying, hey, the rate is $500 an hour and it could be 10 hours, it could be 500 hours, who knows? We say, okay, we know how long it's going to take. We know how much effort's going to go into it. It is a all-inclusive flat fee. There are no kind of additional hourly rates or administrative charges or all these other things that get tacked on to a normal kind of litigation case. And so then as a business owner, I can look at it and say, okay, got a dispute and it's worth $40,000 or so, and it's going to cost me $5,000 all in to go get it resolved. Do I want to spend that $5,000 and do I have confidence in my case and the merits behind it? Or do I not, or whatever? But it gives you the certainty to make a decision based off how you want to go pursue it. And to me, that was like the most disruptive thing because that is not common in the legal industry. The entire business is built around billable hours and as many billable hours as humanly possible. And that is insanely frustrating as a finance person trying to help make decisions for a business. Let's say I wasn't involved in legal tech and trying to forecast out what my expenses are going to be or trying to allocate out expenses for, or be able to try to make decisions on how to pursue or mitigate risk from that without any sense of what it's going to cost. You have absolutely no idea what to do. And so I got really excited by the idea of like, hey, by adding some tech, by creating some kind of common sense procedures, we actually can have enough certainty around how long something's going to take and what it's going to cost to be able to give that level of certainty to the other side. Say, no, it is going to cost. We have a couple of different tiers of dispute. Let's say it's $5,000 and that's it. You know exactly what it's going to cost. It will never cost any more than that. And it's up to you whether you want to pursue it or not.
Most CFOs see legal as a cost center, that it's something to like control, not reimagine. But you've argued that finance should actively push legal teams to rethink how services are priced and delivered, which I love, because like we're in this world now where everyone's like usage-based pricing. We love that. It's like, but no, the legal model, like the goal is to push as many billable hours through it as possible, which is usage-based. It's like we should actually move back to like a flat fee.
It depends on the scenario. Like a usage-based model is fabulous for, web hosting or so, because I don't have to go buy a server or so. I can just pay as I use it through there. When it comes to like litigation, you don't know how long it's going to take. You don't know what you have no sort of information to go off of. Where in like web hosting, you might have your traffic, you might have historicals, but like, and so you want to pay by use from that. And yeah, on the litigation side, it was kind of like, so my wife had a baby and it frustrated me to no end that I could never get a sense of like, what is it going to cost to have a baby?
Yeah.
Like people have babies every day. Like it is a very, very common thing.
Dude, I went through this too. I was like, is this like a $5,000 thing or like 50? Like, what am I going to hit with?
Yeah, and I get that there's different circumstances, scenarios, but like you will never get a straight answer. This is what it will cost, and it's like, well, we're at the point that we probably can't. We can probably say this is what it's going to cost, and here's the situations where it might be something different from it. But here's your basic cost to have a baby or so. You can do the exact same thing in litigation, and that is a massive. The United States spends hundreds of billions of dollars on litigation. It's all under this sense of like, we're gonna tell you what it costs when it's over, kind of thing. And as a finance person, like that should give you nightmares. Like I never want to know what something's going to cost until it's over. I want to know what it's going to cost up front so I can decide what to do about it. And so that's really what New Era is doing. And the reason I think it's really important that a finance team like is involved in those decisions is like the legal team might not have the same set of like incentives behind trying to understand what is something going to cost and what is the impact of it. Like they're tasked with like reduce risk for the company, right? And so that means if I have to go pursue a case to reduce that risk or mitigate that risk, like my job is to make sure we don't get sued or we win a case. We win it. I may not be motivated or incentivized based off of what it costs or that level of certainty. I'm motivated by the outcome at the end of that. Do that, and that can be conflicting with what the finance executive cares about through there. But collectively, the two of them together care about the business, and the business needs to reduce their risk or pursue elements, and they need to ensure that the business thrives through that. And those two things are a combination of like your kind of legal strategy and your financial strategy. And so I think finance can play a huge role in working collaboratively with. We use the legal team as an example, but it's the same thing in marketing and distribution or operations or anything else. It's okay, well, how are you approaching things now? And finance people tend to be relatively creative. They're not known for being creative people, but they're creative in terms of like, all right, how are we going to forecast the business? How are we going to build a model around things? How can we come up with sensitivity analysis for various elements? And they can very quickly hone in on like, hey, you have this giant black box hole of litigation spend that you have no idea ever what it's going to cost.
Oh yeah, I don't know how to budget for it. I used to just put like just lump sums like 50K this quarter, 50K that quarter, but like that could blow up and be 5 million easily.
Totally, right? And so bringing in somebody like on the finance side, they can say, well, have you thought about a flat fee? And the legal team would say, that's ridiculous. Like nobody would ever accommodate that. But the reality is there are like businesses are evolving and changing at all times. And alternative fee arrangements are starting to become really common in the legal industry. It's just sometimes you need somebody with a fresh perspective to step in and say, okay, well, this seems kind of crazy. Why are we doing it like this? Why don't we try it like that?
Well, forgive me for a potentially stupid question, but you need two to tango. And the whole reason that the situation arises because two parties don't agree on something. How do you get them to agree to use the platform?
Yeah. So the way arbitration and any kind of like dispute resolution, whether that's going through court or arbitration or mediation, is typically there's a contract in advance. Like every contract you've ever signed, every time you click kind of the terms and conditions, accepting terms and conditions, somewhere in there is a dispute resolution clause. Okay. And it says, hey, we agree that when or if a dispute ever arises, this is how we're going to resolve it. We're going to go to court. We're going to go to arbitration. It's going to be hosted by New Era ADR. We agree to their rules and procedures. Like that always happens generally before a dispute ever arises. Because to your point, once a dispute arises, it doesn't matter whether it's common sense or not. Whatever one side wants, the other side wants something different. Like they're just going to say no, regardless of what it is. So it's baked into the entire, judicial and contracting process that we work this stuff out in advance. Therefore, then dispute happens. Okay, we've already agreed how we're going to resolve it. We're contractually bound to those terms. The dispute's going to be resolved through New Era or whatever alternative there is that's out there.
That's pretty cool. So you got to be pretty far upstream then to work yourself into the contracts before something bad happens.
So most of our kind of called business development is really working to get inserted into contracts, could be years before a default, ever occurs in that.
Right.
Which creates another challenge in terms of like forecasting a business and whatnot, in terms of like, okay, great, we are inserted in these contracts, and it might be millions and millions.
Now we wait.
now you wait, right? And there are different ways that we've addressed that as well, just in terms of trying to get some predictability. And there's certain industries we might work more in that have a higher volume of disputes of like maybe they're not giant international tax litigation that might only happen every 20 years or so, and it's this big massive thing, but it's like a loan default. If you're a bank, you're going to have a giant portfolio of loans. A certain portion of those are going to be delinquent at any given time. There's almost a
So
statutory
smart.
legal procedure you have to go through that. We're able to facilitate that way more efficiently and streamline than alternatives. And so that tends to be a lot of our business is like high volume, repeatable types of disputes that are not, like I said, bet the company kind of like huge cases. They're just, I have to do this every single day. I need it done quickly and efficiently. And New Era is able to do that through technology more efficiently than anybody else, and in usually more accessible and more fair way too.
I really love that because similar to like a marketplace model, you need to hone in on what your white hot center is and like find that ICP that can do a predictable number of transactions just because like it fits into their model. And like loan defaults, like you can actually predict that percentage on any bank's holdings.
Exactly. And you can come with an immediate value proposition. Generally, I'll talk to general counsels of companies every day, and they all hate the process of arbitration because it's long and frustrating and cumbersome, but they don't deal with it every day. They might have one or two cases a year that come up. So it's not like the top of mind thing. And they don't wake up in the morning like, I need to find a new arbitration alternative,
Right.
And so we get a lot of conversations like, hey, that's super interesting. I love what you guys are doing. And when or if this ever becomes an issue for me, I'd love to utilize you guys. That's great. But I'm not adding a ton of value tomorrow morning to that, company. But, if you're dealing with a portfolio of 500 delinquent loans and you're ripping your hair out trying to manage them and maintain a budget behind them and everything else, I can add value tomorrow morning from that. And that's a much stronger, position to stand on, even if benefits equal on both sides.
Is there another like white hot use case? I don't know, maybe like companies that have employment arbitration, or maybe that's a sticky one.
So we do a lot of employment arbitration. We do all of the arbitrations for like the U.S. Olympic Committee and the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency. So,
that's cool.
If an athlete, didn't qualify for an event and they felt like it's some violation of the rules of that event, and they, let's say it's the Olympics and it's a qualifying round and the actual final event is the next day, they need to be able to like take that case in front of an arbitration panel in 2 hours.
That needs to be done quick.
Exactly. And so that's where we are able to do this. We're kind of the only people that can do it that quickly and give them the ability to like tell their case and actually have an issue and then go compete in that event. Because like imagine you're an athlete and you've spent your entire life training for the Olympics, and due to a technicality that you disagree with or that isn't valid, you're disqualified from the event. Like you were owed, a fast, procedure behind it. There's a huge range, like I said, whether it's Olympics, whether it's loan default, insurance things. We tend to do a lot of work with marketplaces.
Okay.
Who same thing, like from your experience in a marketplace, like marketplace is in a difficult position when something goes wrong in a transaction because they're not the ones selling it. They're not the ones that have ever touched the item. They can't always vouch for like how did the seller describe it or what did they deliver? But they typically have to be the one resolving that dispute, right?
Yeah.
That's part of their value as a marketplace. And so you're put in like the lose-lose position of like having to pick a winner in that of your two customers, which means no matter what, one side is going to blame the marketplace and be like, oh, they're biased and they only support sellers and they only support buyers or anything else. And so it's really beneficial for that marketplace, particularly for like the hairier, higher dollar value transactions, to say, you know what, I'm going to let a professional handle this. They have no skin in the game whatsoever. They have no bias towards any party through this. They're going to look at the facts of the case. They're going to hear each side, and a totally independent, unbiased judge is going to make a decision from it. And that can be hugely beneficial, both from a capacity standpoint for marketplace, but also just, again, from extracting yourself from having to like pick a winner and loser amongst your customers, because that's never good.
We spoke to the CFO of ACV Auctions, and they do used car transactions. And so like it could be $30,000 car, $50,000 car. Their take rate is roughly like 2%. But if you think about it, the risk and the transaction is still on them. So one bad sale, you have to do 50 good sales to potentially make up for that. So that's like a use case that you're like, I just need to get this through arbitration pretty quickly.
Yeah, we would deal with that all the time at Reverb. You have a $15,000 vintage guitar that was sold as absolutely mint and original and pristine, and it turns out the pickups were changed from it. And and the seller's gone or so. Like, and so, as the marketplace, you're going to eat, if you care about your customer retention, you're going to eat that cost and you're going to give a refund from that and you're going to make both sides happy. And it can be really expensive if your take rates, 5 or 10% or so. So yeah, that's the type of stuff that would end up in yours. Not so much the $25 kind of t-shirt sale or something, because it's not going to make economic sense to go put that in front of a judge. But we do a lot of work with like home repair services or something. Let's say your contractor flooded your kitchen or so, and you hired them through a marketplace, and that's $40,000 worth of damage, or vice versa. A homeowner, stiffs a contractor on a $30,000 invoice or something. Those are the types of transactions that make a ton of sense to say, just put that in front of a judge and let them make a decision, and do so in 6 days or so, to a fast turnaround time.
Or me in this expensive Airbnb where the AC doesn't work. Nonetheless, I'm going to take you into what we call our long ass lightning round. So, like I said, you're a Renaissance man, you're a successful guy, but I ask every successful person on the podcast, what's a story of something you've screwed up before?
So, wearing lots of different hats, one of which was like overseeing, some mergers and acquisitions we did. We ended up buying a music store that was going out of business because we had the opportunity to acquire a bunch of inventory at a really low price, which typically a marketplace never touches inventory. Like, you don't want to.
You don't want that on your books.
Whereas anything else. But we saw it as a customer acquisition opportunity, which was like, hey, if I can go acquire this inventory at kind of rock bottom prices, drip that out on the platform, and something that might normally cost $1,000 costs $200. Like, that's going to be a huge sort of promotional, value for the platform, acquire customers that we can then go retain. So we strategically decided to acquire some inventory and sell it directly through that. So I spent months kind of facilitating the acquisition of all this inventory. We ended up renting a warehouse to hold it. We kind of got some people, involved in actually doing fulfillment and everything else. And we started to like market, like, the fact that like, hey, all this great exclusive, well-priced inventory is about to drop on Reverb. And our intention originally was to like drip it out over time so that like, one person just didn't snap it all up, in which case you don't get the same benefit. And so I was in charge of all of this, including everything up to like listing the inventory for sale on the platform. And it's hundreds of thousands of items. And so we get to the day, we kind of kick it off. I'm kind of slowly uploading inventory, and like my CEO is kind of breathing over my shoulder, getting really excited because we're putting the stuff out there and it's like selling in seconds or so. And he's like, list it all. Like, we gotta go. We have it all. Like, what's the point of waiting? Just do it all. Like, it's going to be awesome. And it's like, oh, and like, got a little flustered through there. And I kind of had to the way we uploaded inventory was just to be like a CSV import file. And by doing that, I messed up one row on that CSV import. And so the product items and the prices were off to like $1,000 thing was like $2. And I uploaded it all. They all went live. We had like thousands of pieces of inventory at like insane prices. And like that got out on some message boards. Like the whole site started going crazy. It took us like maybe 10 minutes to realize what was going on. It was, oh my God, like we had to shut everything down, try to like close all this inventory. But like, damage was kind of done. We'd sold hundreds, maybe thousands of things at like insane prices that we ended up making good on. And like we had to cover the cost of it, but it was like 100% my fault. I had to get people in to like fix it and help me figure out what to do from it. It ended up being overall a successful campaign and everything. Like it was totally worth doing, but I screwed up on it. No doubt about it.
I got a Stratocaster for 74 cents.
Totally. Like that actually happened for like a span of 15 minutes on Reverb in 2018 or so.
Thank you for sharing that. I can only imagine your heart rate during this.
I didn't sleep for a day after this.
If you could tell your younger self something knowing what you know today, what would you tell him?
Start a business, particularly when you're young and don't have the kind of family commitments, financial commitments. Start a business. There's nothing I found in my career or people that I've hired and trained and worked with that gives you the same level of like understanding and problem solving ability and motivation as actually being the one in charge of everything. And even if you're sole proprietor, just you're the one doing it, like it gives you a sense of how a business runs and the accountability that you have to take as an owner of that business that transfers into anything else. You're, again, whether you end up in finance, you end up in legal or marketing or customer service or anything else. Like once you've actually been that boss, CEO, fundraiser, like, again, it doesn't have to be a massive business, but that is like an unreplaceable experience, I think. And it gets harder and harder to do that as you get older, as you get more established in your career, as you have a mortgage and kids and all these other things. So I think everybody should attempt to start a business, not hoping that it fails, but knowing it probably will. And that's fine because, the experience that you've given you is like consolidating a decade's worth of experience into however long you're running it.
I love that. Can you walk me through your finance software stack? What tools does your team use to get the job done?
Yeah, I mean, we keep it pretty simple, and New Era is a relatively early stage company, so we'll use like Brex for our banking, use QuickBooks Online for our accounting software, Gusto for HR and payroll and contractor payments. That's probably the bulk of it. Google Sheets and Google Slides for analysis and decks and things like that. HubSpot as a CRM system, which will then, also integrate in some amount of like financial information and customer information. And then anything else is generally kind of custom built up our platform. So a lot of the integrations with that and building. Oh, we'll use Stripe for payment processing. Those are probably the big components.
Nice. We're big fans of Brex.
Yeah, I mean, we were in a couple of other similar kind of neobanks, and Brex has been the one I've been the happiest with. And then we also we maintain a debt facility with a traditional bank, and they're great. But like you look at the user experience difference between trying to manage a checking account at like a traditional bank and somebody like Brex or so, and it's just like
night and day.
So night and day,
yeah. Last one I got for you. Any stories from recruiting or working with music artists that are memorable?
On paper, it's the greatest job in the world. Your job is to go to clubs and see music and then go, you're not always partying with rock stars, but you're definitely part of the whole little piece from it. And so I went into it like, this is the greatest job in the world. And it very much is for a year or so. Because then by a year, you're like, all right, not only am I out till 3 a.m. every single night at general, again, not every band deserves a chance, but not every band you want to go see at 3 a.m. But not only are you doing that, but you still have a day job too. You still are in the office at 8 a.m. helping make records, do coordination, or up until 6 or 7 at night. So it was 18, 20-hour days every single day, day after day after day after day after day. And so after a while, hey, this is awesome. I'm glad I had this experience. I have done everything. I've been in every bar in New York City. I have been backstage in Madison Square Garden. I've done all these amazing things, and now I'm ready to go do something else because I can't. There are people who do it their entire career, and God bless them, and they're amazing, and they have amazing ears, and they've managed to work a work-life balance that works for that. I couldn't do it at 24. I had to go do something else. Granted, that was then go run a record company, so it wasn't a total shift from it, but it got you out a little bit of just the pure grind of listening. And because for me, it got me to the point of I started to not enjoy music as much. And that really hurt because I was that is my passion and what I've always loved. And so I am super glad I did it. So I know I'm not giving you kind of juicy stories of.
No, but I totally get what you mean that on paper, it looks like a dream job. But then once you're in it, you're anything can be a job, it becomes
100%.
Real work, even if you do love music.
Yeah, and I think it was a good learning for me of hey, figure out what you're really passionate about and then go do it. And then don't be afraid to go do something else after you've experienced that, And that's how I ended up being a musician, being a talent scout, being a label owner, being a consultant, being running an e-commerce company, running a legal tech company. It seems this kind of ping pong or pinball kind of career path, but it's really saying hey, what motivates and interests me? Awesome, let's go do it. And as soon as it feels like it's time to go do something else, don't, outstay your welcome. If you're not happy in there, or if you've just done it and you need to be, motivated to go do something else, go do something else, because that's how you build experience.
I love that sage wisdom. Kevin, thanks so much for joining me on the pod. This was a blast. You're the world's most interesting man, world's most interesting CFO. We're giving you the mantle until somebody else takes it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Run the Numbers is a mostly LLC production. Yelling and intro by Fat Joe. Artwork by some AI thingamajig. Podcast and video editing is done by Cleancast at cleancast.io. Nothing said on this podcast is intended to be business or investment advice. It's the sole opinion of me, a guy who feeds his dog too much ice cream and has a history of net operating losses, lol. If you like this podcast, please hit subscribe. It would mean a lot to me. And also check out mostlymetrics.com. That's my newsletter where I explore business models and financial metrics. Thanks for riding with me. Share this with your friends. Peace.